Welcome back to your daily English dose. We're glad you could join us today. We're going to do a deep dive into something really quite specific today, a key moment from late 2025.
That's right. We're looking at that very high-stakes meeting in Washington, D.C.
Between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and then U.S. President Donald Trump.
And this wasn't just any meeting. It really centered on one single critical item.
So what's our mission for this deep dive?
We need to understand why this one weapon, the Tomahawk cruise missile, was seen as such a game changer for Ukraine.
Okay.
And also what diplomatic moves were happening kind of behind the scenes right before the meeting.
The context is crucial.
Definitely. And ultimately, why did President Zelenskyy leave Washington without those missiles? That's the key question.
It really highlights this tension, doesn't it? You had Ukraine's, desperate, urgent need for this advanced weapon.
Just survival, really.
And on the other side, Trump's focus, which seemed to be much more on striking a personal deal to end the war, his way.
A clash of priorities, set against a backdrop of intense warfare.
Okay, let's set the scene then. October 2025. What was the situation on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, the war had really ground down into this brutal, prolonged phase. A war of attrition, as they call it.
Meaning slow, hard-fought gains.
Exactly. Progress was incredibly slow, measured in inches sometimes. But Russia was still gaining territory. Slowly, yes, but still pushing forward.
Do you have numbers on that?
Sources indicated they'd taken about 123 square miles, which is around 318 square kilometers, just in the weeks leading up to this meeting. So incremental, but constant pressure.
So with big breakthroughs looking unlikely, Ukraine had to change tactics.
Precisely. They shifted focus. If you can't break through on the front line decisively, you attack the enemy's ability to sustain the fight. Economic warfare.
And they were having some success there, weren't they? With drones.
Oh, absolutely. Quite remarkable success, actually. Targeting Russia's energy infrastructure, their oil refineries, deep inside the country.
I remember reports suggesting those drone attacks had taken something like 40% of Russia's refining capacity offline.
That figure was widely reported, yes. A staggering number. It showed the vulnerability of Russia's industrial backbone. But even those drones had limitations.
Right, range, payload.
Exactly. And that's where the Tomahawk missile request comes in. Ukraine needed something, bigger. Something with much longer legs and a much heavier punch.
Okay, let's break down the Tomahawk for our listeners. What makes it special?
Well, first, it's a long-range cruise missile. We're talking ranges often cited between 1,600, maybe up to 2,500 kilometers. That's a significant reach.
Way beyond what their drones could do reliably at the time.
Oh, absolutely. And crucially, how it flies. Tomahawks fly very, very low to the ground. They hug the terrain.
To stay under radar.
Exactly. Makes them incredibly difficult to detect and intercept compared to, say, ballistic missiles or even some other cruise missiles. Stealthy.
And the warhead. You mentioned a bigger punch.
Much bigger. Around 450 kilograms. That's substantial payload. Far heavier than what most of the drones Ukraine was using for deep strikes could carry.
So the strategic thinking here wasn't just about hitting things near the front line.
No. This is about changing the entire strategic map. With that kind of range and survivability, Ukraine could suddenly hold targets deep inside Russia at risk.
Places that had felt safe before?
Right. We're talking major military bases, supply depots, critical industrial sites, even potentially targets around Moscow.
And things like the Shahed drone factories, those were key production sites for Russia.
Absolutely key targets. The thinking was, if you can inflict significant pain on Russia's military-industrial complex, maybe even threaten the capital, you force Putin to recalculate.
Throw us into the negotiating table on terms that aren't just about Russia winning.
That was the hope. Make the cost of continuing the war too high for the Russian leadership to bear.
So in the meeting with Trump, Zelenskyy didn't just ask for them. He offered something in return.
Yes, that was an interesting detail. He apparently proposed a trade. Ukraine's advanced battle-proven drone technology in exchange for Tomahawks.
How did Trump react to that?
Sources said he sounded quite receptive to the idea itself, reportedly smiling and nodding. It was an unusual offer, trading frontline tech like that.
But the offer, however interesting, didn't change the final outcome.
No, because the real negotiation, arguably, had already happened.
Okay, so you're saying the stage was set before Zelenskyy even arrived in Washington.
Pretty much. The problem for Zelenskyy was that President Trump had already been using the idea of giving Tomahawks to Ukraine.
Using it as leverage against Russia.
Exactly. For months, the threat that the U.S. might supply these missiles was a diplomatic tool in Trump's pocket. a pressure point on Putin.
So a classic Trump negotiation tactic, maybe. Keep the other side guessing.
You can see it that way, but this threat needed to be, well, deployed or traded. And that happened the day before Zelensky's visit.
Right, there was that phone call.
A very significant phone call. Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin for over 2 hours, described afterwards as very productive.
2 hours is a long time for heads of state. What happened on that call that was so critical?
Putin played his hand very skillfully. He directly addressed the Tomahawk issue.
He warned Trump off.
Explicitly. He stated that supplying these missiles would cause, and I quote, substantial damage to the U.S.-Russia relationship. A clear red line.
Okay, a direct warning. Did he offer anything else? Or just threats?
He also, interestingly, downplayed their impact, claimed they wouldn't actually change the final outcome of the war anyway.
Huh. So don't do it, it's dangerous, but also it won't work anyway.
It's a classic negotiation tactic, right? Maximize the perceived risk for the other side while minimizing the potential gain. But the key wasn't just the warning.
What was the key then?
The result of the call. Trump and Putin agreed to hold a peace summit soon in Budapest, Hungary.
The summit. That's what Trump wanted. A big, visible diplomatic event.
It certainly fit his desire to be seen as a deal maker, especially on a major conflict like this. So Putin essentially traded.
He traded agreement to a summit.
A diplomatic win for Trump.
For the removal of the Tomahawk threat.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Putin likely calculated that a summit was a relatively low price to pay to ensure those long-range missiles stayed out of Ukrainian hands. It was a strategic concession from the U.S. side, exchanged for a diplomatic concession from the Russian side.
Wow. So Putin effectively neutralized Trump's biggest piece of leverage before the person asking for that leverage, Zelensky, even got into the room.
That's a good way to put it. He didn't need to worry about stopping Tomahawks on the battlefield. He stopped them with a phone call. The dynamics for Zelensky's meeting were fundamentally altered.
It really makes you wonder, was the Tomahawk threat ever really about giving them to Ukraine? Or was it always just the bargaining chip to get Putin to agree to that summit?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can only analyze the actions and outcomes.
Okay, so Zelensky arrives for the White House meeting. The Tomahawk discussion is already effectively off the table, even if he doesn't fully know it yet. How did the meeting go?
Reports describe the atmosphere as cordial, polite on the surface. But when it came to the missiles, Trump was reportedly completely non-committal.
Which sounds like a polite way of saying no.
Essentially, yes. And we can piece together the reasons given, or at least hinted at, for denying the request. There were 3 main lines of argument presented publicly or semi-publicly around that time.
Okay, what were they?
First, the big one, fear of escalation, the standard concern. The official line was that the U.S. did not want an escalation because, quote, many bad things could happen.
That's always the worry with providing more advanced weaponry, isn't it? Crossing a Russian red line. But is it just a convenient excuse sometimes?
It certainly serves as a powerful justification for inaction or caution. It's hard to argue against wanting to avoid escalation. The second reason floated was about U.S. inventory.
U.S. supplies. Trump said they didn't have enough Tomahawks to spare.
He framed it as Tomahawks being a big deal. Very important weapon systems that the U.S. needed for its own defense readiness.
Given the size of the U.S. arsenal, does that really hold water? Or was it just an easy out?
Most analysts at the time viewed that with some skepticism. It seemed more like a convenient way to prioritize perceived domestic needs over a deeper commitment to Ukraine's offensive capabilities. It sounds responsible domestically.
Okay, escalation, inventory. Oh, what's the third?
This one seemed closer to Trump's core motivation. Hope for peace. He basically argued that the war could end soon, implying his upcoming summit with Putin would make the Tomahawks unnecessary.
We won't need them because I'm about to make a deal.
Pretty much. Why talk about more weapons when peace is just around the corner? His version of peace, anyway.
And right after the meeting, he pushed that peace idea publicly, didn't he?
Yes, almost immediately. He called on both Kyiv and Moscow to essentially freeze the conflict, stop where they are along the existing front line.
And just leave it like that. Let history decide, I think was the phrase used.
Exactly. Which, in practical terms, means accepting the current lines of occupation, at least for the time being, a de facto ceasefire based on the existing front.
That puts Zelensky in an incredibly tough spot. He just got turned down for the weapons he thinks he needs, and now he's being told to stop fighting.
A very difficult position.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that publicly without alienating your most important backer?
What did he say? I remember his response being quite carefully worded.
It really was a masterclass in diplomatic tightrope walking. When a reporter directly asked if he was leaving Washington feeling optimistic about getting the missiles, he didn't say yes or no, he just said, "I am realistic."
Realistic says everything and nothing. Very skillful.
Very. And then he addressed the ceasefire proposal. He actually agreed with the first part, saying, yes, we must stop where we are. But then he immediately added the crucial condition. The next step must be to speak.
So he took Trump's freeze the conflict idea and reframed it, not as an endpoint, but as the necessary start for actual negotiations.
Precisely. He subtly shifted the emphasis from a frozen conflict, which would favor Russia retaining occupied land, to the necessity of talks following any cessation of fighting. It acknowledged Trump's proposal while firmly keeping Ukraine's core interest, negotiated withdrawal, on the agenda.
Clever. He managed to sound cooperative while not actually conceding his long-term goals.
It was about maintaining dignity and agency, even after a significant setback.
Okay, so let's pull back a bit. Zelenskyy didn't get the Tomahawks. The immediate request failed. But looking at the bigger picture, what was the real effect of this whole episode?
Well, I think the key takeaway here, the synthesis for you listening, is about the nature of power in these situations. The actual physical weapon, the Tomahawk, wasn't delivered.
Right.
But the discussion about it, the sustained threat that it might be delivered, that itself proved to be a really powerful diplomatic tool.
Powerful for whom? For Trump, you mean?
Primarily for the U.S. diplomatic effort, yes. That threat, wielded by Trump, seems to have been instrumental in achieving one of his key objectives, getting Putin back to the negotiating table, or at least back to a high-profile summit.
So the idea of the weapon achieved the diplomatic goal, even if the weapon itself never arrived in Ukraine.
It appears so. It drew Putin, who'd been quite resistant to direct talks with Western leaders for a while, back into that face-to-face engagement with the U.S. leadership. The threat was traded for the summit.
It's easy to get lost in the high-level politics, though. How does this connect back to the people actually living through the war?
That's a crucial point. We found a quote from around that time from a store owner in a Kiev suburb. His name was Volodymyr. His shop had been completely destroyed by Russian missiles earlier in the war.
What did he say?
Despite all the complex maneuvering in Washington, despite the disappointment over the Tomahawks potentially not coming, his perspective was very clear, very grounded. He said something like, "Truth and democracy will win. We just want to live. We don't want to give up. We just want them to leave us alone."
Wow, cuts through all the strategy, doesn't it? Just that basic human desire for peace and sovereignty.
Exactly. It underlines what the entire conflict is fundamentally about for Ukrainians. And it reminds us that these geopolitical chess moves have profound human consequences.
So this whole episode really shows these complex layers, doesn't it? You have Ukraine fighting for survival on the ground.
The U.S., under Trump, pursuing a very specific kind of diplomatic victory, maybe prioritizing the deal itself.
And Russia playing a surprisingly agile diplomatic game to counter military pressure without necessarily firing a shot in response to that specific threat.
Right. The Tomahawk missile, in this instance, became less a weapon of war and almost more like a piece of diplomatic currency. Its value was in the threat of its use, not its actual deployment by Ukraine. #outro.
Okay, let's quickly recap what we've learned in this deep dive.
Correct.
We saw why Ukraine desperately wanted Tomahawks that long range, the ability to hit deep inside Russia.
And we saw how Putin cleverly countered that threat, agreeing to the Budapest summit in that key phone call before Zelensky's meeting.
And we explored Trump's reasons for ultimately saying no, or at least not yes, worries about escalation, claims about U.S. inventory, and his focus on his own peace plan.
So, reflecting on all that, here's a final thought for you to take away and consider. If, in this case, the threat of providing a powerful weapon proved more diplomatically useful for the U.S. administration than actually giving the weapon to Ukraine, what does that tell us about the future? Could we see more situations where military aid is promised or hinted at primarily as leverage in negotiations rather than for its direct battlefield impact? Does the threat sometimes become more valuable than the hardware itself?
That's a really interesting question to ponder, how military aid might be used more as a political tool going forward. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into global politics and strategy. We hope this helped you understand this important event a little better and maybe gave you some new English words, too.
Yes, thanks for listening.
Be sure to subscribe and join us again tomorrow for your daily English dose. Goodbye for now.